Our scripture reading of the day comes from the book of Ruth, chapters 1 through 18. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept out loud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this they wept out loud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Amen.
When God uses the ordinary to do the extraordinary, he calls the unlikely.
Before we begin the message this morning, I just want to pause and acknowledge God's presence among us this morning. As we continue in our series of Unlikely, one of the things that's unlikely for me is that I'm often moved emotionally to tears by a hymn. Hymns get me here in the head as I think about the theology and the nature of God that they reflect, but they don't often get me here. And I just want to thank Armin and our other musicians for leading us in worship this morning and just allowing you to be used of God to remind us of how, when we all use our gifts, our talents, and our treasures, no matter how unlikely they are, that the Lord honors that. I am Pastor Jack. If we have not had a chance to meet yet, that could be because I spend a lot of my time down at Bridge CLE, which is our mission down in the Clark Fulton neighborhood of the city. But I am delighted to be with you all this morning as we do continue our series in Unlikely. And I just have to say, this series was designed so that all four of us pastors could work together and pick an unlikely hero from Scripture, write a message on it, and then we could share pulpits and swap through the summer and share ministry in that way, but also lighten up duties for some other preparation for ministry. And so Pastor Mark is down at Bridge City this morning. But I do need to let you know that as we worked on this series, and of course Pastor Mark went first with Joseph, and then last week Pastor Keon was here with Moses. And I just have to tell you all, they cheated, okay? That's just all there is to it. They did. I mean, think about it. Joseph was basically the chief operating officer of the most powerful nation in the world. And then you have Moses, a guy who parted an ocean, for crying out loud, right? And this morning we're going to hear about Ruth. What did Ruth do? Well, Ruth actually did one of the most important things that any human being can do. But before we get to that, we need to talk first about Naomi. Naomi, as you just heard from our scripture, was a Jewish woman who lived in Bethlehem. Yes, that Bethlehem, the same one Jesus came from. And she had a husband and 2 sons, and there was such an extreme famine in their region that they moved to a nation called Moab. And the fact that they moved to Moab just tells us how desperate they were, because moving from Israel to Moab was not like moving from Bay Village to Westlake. These 2 countries had severe ethnic tension that had just been broiling for generations and generations. They had gone through a cycle of war and oppression, one fighting the other, one winning, oppressing the others for generations. And so for Naomi and her husband and her sons to go to Moab, they had to be in a place of extreme desperation. They go to this place where there is no way they're going to be welcomed, but yet in the story, love conquers all, because somehow these young men find two ladies that they want to marry, and her sons marry 2 Moabite women. But over the course of their time spent in this country, Naomi's husband dies, and then 10 years later, her sons die. We don't know how they died, but Naomi's situation goes from desperate to hopeless. It's hopeless because in that time, women did not have the income of their own. They were reliant upon their husbands to take care of them. And if their husbands died, then they were reliant upon their sons. And Naomi has gone through 3 providers, and now she's left with none, and she's in a hopeless situation. And so she decides to return home, perhaps thinking that if she's going to be a beggar, then maybe it's better to be a beggar among the people that you know than a foreign country. And so as she's preparing to go and starts early in this journey, her daughter-in-laws go with her. And the reason for that is that the customs of the day would have dictated that when they married Ruth or Naomi's sons, they would have become a part of her family. And Naomi does the gracious thing by releasing them from their obligations. She's basically saying, it is too late for me. There's no way that there's no out of this situation for me. My life is over and done for, but yours isn't. It's not too late for you. Go home, marry, have children, have a happy life. Don't yoke yourself to me. Because if you yoke yourself to me, then you're going to go down with me. And it takes some urging, but Orpah, the first of the daughter-in-laws, finally, she gives in and she listens to Naomi and she returns home. But Ruth refuses. Ruth refuses, and she says what I think is one of the most beautiful statements in all of Scripture. Ruth says to her mother-in-law, "Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." And this is where we see Ruth doing one of the most important things that any human being can do. and that is that she walked with another person through their pain. Ruth refused to leave Naomi. Naomi was completely traumatized, so much that she equated herself with her dead husband and her dead sons. It's like she's saying, I've lost those who are most important to me, and I might as well be dead myself. And when Naomi does return home, when she goes back to the village, this place that she grew up, after decades of being away, the women that she knew, her friends in the town, they see her coming, but it's years of age and hardship have changed her appearance, and they look at her and they say, "Can this be Naomi? Can this be Naomi?" And Naomi says, "Don't call me Naomi, because Naomi means pleasant. Call me Mara. Mara means bitter. For I went away full, but I have come back empty. The losses of life have left me so hollow that it's changed my identity. I'm no longer pleasant. I'm bitter." Ever been there? Ever felt like that? Mental health experts tell us that trauma is an experience that disrupts, threatens, or harms the safety, security, and or stability of a person that's beyond their capacity to master at that time. And what this means is that something happens to somebody that's beyond their control, and it's so far out of their control that they don't have either the emotional resources or the mental understanding or the financial capacity or the spiritual depth or the relational connections to be able to grab that thing that's out of control and make sense of it and manage it in their lives. And so their ability to be resilient in the face of trauma is compromised. And because of this, trauma robs a person of the ability to trust. Many people who have faced trauma, what they do is they say to themselves, even subconsciously, someone has hurt me, or someone has failed me, or someone didn't give me what I needed. Therefore, I can only rely on myself. And what they do is put up a hand, or they build a wall. They say, "Don't come near. Don't come near, because either one, I can't trust you. You're just going to hurt me again. Or two, I'm only going to take you down with me. This ship is sinking, and you're going down with it." And that is the exact dynamic that we see happening with Ruth and Naomi. Naomi's so bitter, she's hurting so bad, she says to Ruth, "Go, leave me." And she tries to isolate herself. But Ruth, our unlikely hero, this woman from a despised people group who was herself poor, who herself was vulnerable, who herself was traumatized in the loss of a husband, she does one of the most important things that any human being can do. She walks with Naomi through her pain. Why is it so important to walk with someone through their pain? Well, normally this is the part in the message where I would ask that question, and then I would spend the rest of the sermon answering that for you. But this morning we are blessed to have an expert among us who can share a perspective on that. If you were here a few weeks ago, you might have heard me say that we are launching a resilience ministry, you might say trauma recovery ministry at Bridge CLE. And the reason for this is that people can't have hope for a brighter future if they don't have somebody to help them walk through and sort through the pain of their past. And as we've been working on developing this ministry, the person who has led us and coached us is Sarah Hendrickson. I want to invite her to come on up now. Sarah is the former director of the Center for Health Resilience at Metro Health. She is currently working on her PhD. Come on over this way. in counseling education, and she is a partner in the Evalier Group. I could spend a lot of time just telling you about the Evalier Group and the amazing things that the team of women that she works with are doing, but the easy way to say it is that these women are the Navy SEALs of trauma recovery services. That's just how it is, all right? Sarah's more qualified than I am, certainly, to speak about this from a professional standpoint, about why it's important to walk with somebody through their pain. But as I've been blessed to get to know her through worshiping together and being a part of the church family at Bridge City, I've also learned that she has a very compelling personal perspective on this as well. And so I just want to invite you to help me welcome Sarah to come share a bit of her story. So.
Good morning. So I'm going to talk to you about two things today. The first thing I'm going to talk to you about is how I've made a home at, or how I've found a home at Bridge City Church. The second thing I'm going to share with you is why it is so important for Bridge CLE to embark on this trauma-informed mission and resilience ministry. They're not mutually exclusive constructs. This all made sense in my head, so I cannot promise that it'll, come out in translation that way. Bear with me. So for those that don't know me, which is pretty much everyone here except anyone that is in the Murtha family, because everybody knows the Murthas know everybody. My name is Sarah Hendrickson. My day job is I'm a trauma specialist and an organizational consultant. I am a mother of two really beautiful children, or at least I think they are. And my husband, Brian, is with us today. He's a barber at Bait Barbershop, so I see some good haircuts here. I think some of you know him. So I don't know how to start this. I didn't know how to begin this. I've never done this before. I speak in front of people all the time, and I'll be honest, I'm up here shaking because this is not my normal crowd. But I didn't know where to begin. I struggled with where to begin. I thought I could tell you my life story. I could tell you about my religious background. I thought really the most important thing we could do is just feel the ground and see if it's cold, because surely hell hath frozen over if I'm before you today. Talk about unlikely. So I, like many, have a complicated relationship with the church. I've always been a believer, even when I tried to convince myself for a few years that I wasn't, even when I was reasonably angry at God for some of the things that I had endured. I've always been a believer. God has placed Ruths in my life to really guide me and carry me along the way, whether I realized it or not. But my relationship with the church was a little bit different. I'm a lifelong academic. My response to all the things in the world, the things that I've experienced, was to better understand, to know, to really know. Believe it or not, I am a trained counselor. I do work with trauma survivors. I hate feelings. I like your feelings. I hate my feelings. I am not a big fan of them. I really want to know about things. I want to know about feelings. I don't want to feel them. So, I come from a very cognitive approach. Faith itself does not come easy for me. I want to better understand. I hear Presbyterians get that a little bit, but maybe, I don't know. I was raised Baptist. That should tell you a lot. So I was raised in near poverty by people carrying a lifetime of their own pain, their own traumas. I was the first in my family to attend college. I came home the lone, liberal, college-educated woman at the table. You know, you all have one in your family too, a few more these days. I was outspoken. I wanted to be heard. I wanted people to hear what was going on with others. And so I was always the larger-than-life voice and personality in the room. And for many reasons, I just didn't fit in. I just never fit in. I never fit in with my family. I didn't think like them. I didn't live like them. I was okay at sports, never first string. I was good at school. I was never top of my class. I'm a good mom, but you will never catch me at a PTA meeting. In fact, I think my biggest fear is to have to read to children. That just sounds awful to me. That just tells you a little bit about who I am, my poor kiddos. I'm a good person who sometimes does bad things, just like all of us. I epitomize both and the church to me seemed either or. You're either a believer or you're not. You're either, you're either saved or you're not. You either belong here or you don't. And that was until I stepped into Bridge City Church. It was the first time I'd ever gone to that church or even heard about it, I was encouraged by a dear friend, one of my Ruths. And I went in with my full spectrum goggles of skepticism on, like, oh boy, this is going to be interesting. And this baby man got up there and gave this amazing message. And you know, I was blown away. And it was the first time in my life, in my 40 plus years, or as Keon likes to recently describe me as middle-aged, so there's that, I really felt like I belonged. I did. And not just to this transformative church that was able to bring together intuition and intellect, but to God. I get up every morning and I pray, God, please lead me where you need me. And he led me to Bridge City Church, and he led me right to him. It felt like a spiritual hug, and if you know me, which many of you don't, I don't like hugs. My second greatest fear is that moment in church when they say, turn around and greet your neighbor. Christians like to hug. It's a lot for me, but I do it. So the reality is that I stand before you today because of the Ruths in my life, because of the people who walked alongside me. My first Ruth was my junior high counselor, school counselor, who sat with me while my parents went through a very contentious and painful divorce. The second Ruth was a high school teacher who noticed the bruises and sat with me while Children's Services removed me from my father's home. That third Ruth, she believed in me enough to go to college, to graduate college a whole lot of times over. And that fourth Ruth sits among you today because she's the Ruth that brought me to God. Again, talk about unlikely. I met Mary Breslin when she was also a baby, 21, 22, just gotten married. I was in my 30s, I had 2 kiddos, and I had a lifetime of experiences that I guarantee could not be found in her homeschool books. But yet, in all of our differences, she walked alongside me. She answered my questions. I constantly pushed. I asked all the questions. Why this? Why that? Why, make sense of this for me. And she walked alongside of it, and she showed me what it's like to live faith in action. She showed me what the love of Jesus looks like in human form. I remember telling her a few years ago, we were standing on the top of our parking garage at the hospital we worked at the time, and I was like, Mary, I am knocking on every door looking for God. And you know, every time I open that door, there's no God, there's just like hypocrisy and contradictions and more pain. And she was like, as only a good friend could do, she's like, Sarah, if you could just shut up for a minute, you might notice that he's been knocking on your door, and all you have to do is let him in. Ruth's and Naomi's often look like super successful people, and sometimes they look obviously broken. And we are at different points in our lives, one and the same. So I'm going to transition now to what my second point is. I swear I'm going to get to it, and I'm going to give this back to Jack because this is not my forte, but there is a phrase that I contemplate often, which is break the binding or an open book will always close. I think about this a lot. Break the binding or an open book will always close. So if you think about a fresh book that's never been cracked open or held open for very long, what you're doing, you know, the binding's doing what it's supposed to do. It's naturally created to hold that book together, protect the pages, protect that sacred text, and it's supposed to, that's doing its job. But the thing is it's counterintuitive to its purpose. A book needs to be opened. If you don't open a book, if you don't read from its pages, it serves no purpose. It makes no difference. So break the binding or an open book will always close. We cannot remain open unless we are willing to free ourselves ever so slightly from the worldly truths we hold absolute, to stretch that glue just a little, to be open, to open ourselves to new readers, and to remain open long enough for that reader to truly understand what holds you together. We deserve to know we are worthy of being, we are worthy of understanding, and we are worthy of being understood. The act of stretching this protective binding may feel counterintuitive. It is, but we know what happens when a book remains rigid. So follow with me on this. We know what happens. As soon as you walk away, as soon as your attention goes elsewhere, as soon as something shiny happens, which is how my brain works, that book slams shut. You've lost your place, right? you're working with someone, that book closes, you've lost your place, and then that book loses its purpose to tell you its truths, to tell you its experience. Resilience coaching at Bridge Clee is an opportunity for us to help open and read from the pages of others while learning how to open ourselves and allowing ourselves to be read in that process. It is to truly know the hearts of others and for our hearts to be truly known. The ultimate goal is that we will come together as an authored compilation of experiences and parables and warnings and guides and poems and love and loss, grace, hope, and salvation. I hear there's a book like that out there, I've been told. We are God's words in human form, and to come alongside people as they hurt, open and authentic, grounded in Jesus' promises is, in my humble opinion, how we begin to heal as a community and how we grow in the absolute truth of Jesus Christ. I wanted to end with a biblical reference, but it turns out I still have some learning to do there. So I'm going to reference Jack's sermon in the book of Ruth where Ruth says, "Where thou goest, I will go." Not just when it's comfortable, not just when it's convenient, not just when it's safe. Where thou goest, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. I will walk with you, and every time you pull down or push me away, I will lift. I will lift you up in prayer. I will hold faith in confidence when you aren't able, and I will safely usher your shame out of the shadows and into God's light. Because we deserve to know and feel we are never alone. That's what it means to be a Ruth, and that's how we walk with our Naomis. God's love is a resilient love. And loving like God is inherently trauma-informed and what makes us resilient as a community. Thank you. Thanks.
Sarah, you have no idea how hard it is for me not to come up and hug you. And Brian, thank you for the best haircut I've ever had. I just really appreciate that. This is why we are launching a resilience ministry, because as much as Christians have been conditioned to think that mission work is about giving people food or clothes or tutoring disadvantaged kids, if we don't start dealing with the heart and the mind issues that cause people to think and act and react in ways that just perpetuate cycles of trauma, then we are just chasing after the wind. Chasing after the wind. We can't tell someone that what you need is Jesus if they can't see the face of Jesus through the fog of pain that they're in. I mean, that's like telling somebody who is a cancer patient but yet has a gaping wound on their leg that's bleeding, they're about to bleed out from a car accident, that what you really need is chemotherapy. Chemotherapy might be what they need for a long, healthy, fulfilling life, but that's not what they're thinking about right now. What they're thinking about in that moment is the pain that they're experiencing and the threat that is to their life. There are 4 types of trauma: acute, chronic, systemic, and historical. Thank you, Sarah, for that knowledge. But acute trauma is what most of us tend to think of when we think of trauma. It's the one-time event. It is the car accident or the severe relational break or the death of a husband and 2 sons like Naomi experienced. The chronic trauma is ongoing trauma like abuse, physical, sexual, verbal, emotional, or ongoing trauma of hunger and poverty like Naomi experienced. Systemic trauma is the kind that somebody living in a particular system cannot escape. Now, not everyone experiences systemic trauma, but in particular cultures, it's reflective of ingrained habits of thinking and behaviors, and it results in things like poverty and racism and oppression. And then there is historical trauma. That's the kind that nobody can escape, such as a war or a pandemic. And here we have in Naomi's story a woman who has experienced all four. Severely traumatized. How do you overcome that? You have to have somebody willing to walk with you through your pain. And that's why we're starting a resilience ministry. And trauma is everywhere. It is everywhere. But in a community like Clark Fulton, statistically speaking, residents who live there are much more likely to experience all four forms of it. And what does it take to burn through the fog of that kind of pain in someone's life so that they can see Jesus more clearly? It takes somebody willing to walk with them. And so that's why I'm happy to tell you that we have hired our own Ruth down at Bridge CLE. Her name is Amina Vargas, and Amina is also a part of the Bridge City Church family, but she is more than qualified, much like Sarah and Mary, to help us with this work. She got a master's in social work from Case Western Reserve. And it's only through a major gift from an incredibly generous friend of our church and our ministries that we've been able to start this ministry. But she'll be starting in a few weeks. And more important than her qualifications professionally is just the person that Amina is. She has a joy and a countenance and a life about her that's Jesus-centered, that allows her to connect with people from all different walks of life and walk with them down the road of pain. But we know that this work isn't just for the experts, right? How many of you have had a Ruth in your life somewhere? Can you raise your hand? Yeah, we see that. I mean, I think I'm seeing at least half, and then the rest kind of doing this number, right? Who is that Ruth? Picture them in your mind for a minute. What was her name? What's his name? What do they look like? Give God thanks for that person in your life. Chances are they weren't an expert. They were just an unlikely person, a friend, who chose to walk alongside. Ruth wasn't an expert. Ruth didn't have much herself in terms of resources. Ruth was poor. Ruth was vulnerable. Ruth was coming from a people who were marginalized. Ruth was traumatized. She lost a husband. She didn't have much to offer, but what she did have was the gift of her presence. She had the gift of, I will go where you go. And that's all it took. That's what the Lord uses in our lives, is whatever we are willing to offer, like the widow's mite giving her offering. Ruth said, I will go where you go. And this is what allowed Naomi to develop resilience. If you're not familiar with the rest of the story, we are landing this plane, I promise. Naomi and Ruth set out for Bethlehem. They made it to the town. They were scraping along. And at that time, it was a common practice for people who were in need, people who were struggling, who were hungry, who were poor, to go into the fields after the hired hands and glean what was left behind. They were allowed to go take the fruits or the grains from the land so that whatever was left, they could go eat from. It was kind of a form of common welfare that was in their culture. And Ruth is out in the field working. This is how she is supporting her and Naomi. And she catches the eye of Boaz. Boaz owns the field. Boaz notices her beauty, but more than that, he hears about her character. What is that Proverbs tells us about a woman of noble character? He hears how Ruth will not leave Naomi, how she does not choose the easy path, how she refuses to forsake and abandon. And so, almost as if it's straight out of a Disney princess movie, Ruth and Boaz end up married. They have a son named Obed. And even though Obed is biologically Ruth's son, the women of the village, the same ones who said, can this be Naomi? They say, this is Naomi's son. This is Naomi's son. And Naomi goes from being bitter, Mara, to full. This is the story of resilience. This is the story of restoration. All because unlikely Ruth did one of the most important things that any person can do and walked beside Naomi in her pain. And I've asked who your Ruth is, but I also have to ask, who is your Naomi? Who is that person that the Lord has put in your path, that he simply wants you to give the gift of presence to? You might say, I don't have the words to say. I don't have the gifts to offer. And God would say, all you need is your presence. All you need is your, I will go where you go. You may not be the chief operating officer of the most powerful nation on earth. You may not be a water parter, but you can be a Ruth, and you can walk alongside someone in their pain.